Hi, I'm Shana Meyerson with the Yoga of War podcast, here today with human rights activist Yasmine Mohammed. If you appreciate and find value in these important discussions, please consider supporting the show so I can continue to bring you such amazing and esteemed guests. Details are pinned in the comments below. Yasmine Mohammed never left the left, but the left definitely did abandon her. After being raised by a born-again Muslim mother and an abusive Islamic stepfather, Yasmine was married off at the age of 20 to an Al-Qaeda operative who subjected her to demoralizing dehumanization that simply stole her soul. Ultimately, it was only to save her daughter from genital mutilation and the same evil, inhuman fate that she was suffering herself, that Yasmine finally found the strength and courage to take her beloved child and escape this horrifying life, imprisoned by radical Islam. A bold and fearless human rights activist, Yasmine has emerged as a celebrated heroine in the fight against anti-Semitism. As the left she used to love abandoned her for anti-Western, anti-humanistic values, she could not help but speak up for what she saw as clear morality, truth, and justice in the wake of the 10/7 massacre. Today, Yasmine Mohammed and I will discuss radical Islam's war on the West and how its threat extends so far beyond Israel and the Jewish people. Yasmine Mohammed is a human rights activist, author, and the co-founder of the Clarity Coalition, dedicated to empowering free thinkers and dissidents from the Middle East. And as the founder of the nonprofit Free Hearts, Free Minds, she is the only advocate focused on supporting the mental health of women and LGBTQ plus individuals from Muslim communities worldwide. Yasmine's best-selling memoir, In Warning to the West, unveiled how the West empowers radical Muslims, translated into 15 languages, shares her personal story of growing up in a fundamentalist Islamic household and her escape from an arranged marriage to an Al-Qaeda terrorist. She is a prominent voice in global advocacy, featured in major media outlets like CNN, NPR, and People magazine, and has spoken at top universities such as Harvard, MIT, and Stanford. Through her podcast, public speaking, and media appearances, Yasmine continues to raise awareness and empower those affected by religious extremism and persecution. Thank you so much, Yasmine, for joining me. I can't tell you what a distinct honor it is to have you on my podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Shana.
I'm smiling because I'm thinking about how many people have had you at podcasts that come into that place where they're like, now let's talk about something uplifting. There's always some joke about like, oh, this hasn't been, like the big celebration and happiness, parade that we were expecting. Because I'm smiling because I'm so thrilled to have you here, regardless of how dark the avenues we might go down become. I want to start by mentioning that today is Veterans Day, otherwise known as Armistice Day. It's the day we honor those who have willingly put their lives on the line in order to protect Western values, freedom, and civilization. So first, I'd like to pay my respects to every man and woman who has served to defend us. And then I have to address the smug complacency of the useful idiots marching for radical Islam and calling for the end of Western civilization in the name of social justice. Yasmine, before we get into your incredible personal story, Can you articulate what goes through your mind when you see these jihadi mobs raging throughout the free world?
Oh, that is very difficult to articulate. I get overcome with so many emotions, so much rage, so much frustration, just fear, absolutely terrified. I'm angry and frustrated that it has reached this point. Like you mentioned in my bio, this is something that I have experienced for a long time. It's something that I've been screaming about for a long time. Me and many people like me. Like you said, we didn't leave the left left us. But now we're seeing it on a global scale when we see the reaction to October 7th from the left. After Jewish people have been such fierce supporters of social justice and supporting all the other minority groups in America, Canada, Australia, Europe, throughout the Western world. And then to be betrayed in such a manner, such a vicious, violent, horrific manner. It's beyond being betrayed. It's a celebration of the death of Jewish people. Not just what happened on October 7th, but every day since then has just been a reliving of the day over and over and over again. I mean, the hostages still haven't come home. We're still living it, you know. But then to see the kinds of things that are happening in Amsterdam and in New York and in France, and it's just they are literally their cries and their goals and their hopes of globalizing the Intifada are coming true. It's coming to fruition. These same people that pretended that they would punch a Nazi and pretended to care so much, that talk the talk. Now, when the rubber hits the road, they get to be in that moment. They get to know finally, what would I have done if I were in Germany or in Poland in the 30s? What would I have done during World War II? What would I have done during the buildup to the Holocaust or during the Holocaust? Who would I have been? And now they are answering that question in a way that none of us could have really predicted. I mean, I knew it was bad, but I didn't expect it to be so blatant, so fast, so furious, so unapologetic.
I agree, but so I'm going to ask a question to sort of stack on that. I think that rational thinkers connect those dots, but I seriously wonder if these people even recognize the parallels between their behaviors and the behaviors of Nazi Europe. Now, I know everyone says Nazi Germany, that is such a whitewashing of reality. All of Europe turned on the Jews. I might even argue America, turning back the St. Louis so that all these hundreds of Jews could go back to be murdered. But I feel like amidst the vast denialism towards 10/7 goes hand in hand, not only with the Holocaust, but they use the Holocaust as their excuse for like, okay, well, now they're just as bad. They don't see themselves in the space of the Nazis. I think they see themselves on the other side. I don't feel like they connect those dots.
No, I think you're absolutely correct, but the problem is they're not connecting any dots. They're just they're consuming whatever memes and propaganda, whatever psyops from the Arab world or Soviet, you know what I mean, or China or whatever kind of what do we call it? It's like Sesame Street level simplicity, childlike, bite-sized memes. That's what they're consuming. They're thinking they've been taught to think of white guy bad, brown guy good, and this is your equation. And then you just pop in whoever. And from their perspective, they're going to see Jewish people, suddenly they're the white ones. Israelis, because obviously they've never been to Israel. Obviously, they've never seen how multicultural Israel is and how so many people in Israel, in fact, the majority of people in Israel, their families are coming from countries like Yemen and Iraq and Egypt and Syria. You know what I mean? That's where they had to live before they were, where they had to live when they were exiled from Israel, and then they were exiled from those countries as well back to Israel. So Israel is obviously not a white colonialist, whatever meme that they have been fed, but it just fits their paradigm. It fits the equation.
Sure, but as much as I have made every single argument that you make, and they are 100% legitimate, there's also what people are not like willing to reckon with is there is no crime in being white. Like, I'm tired
That
of,
too, of course.
but
Absolutely.
it is, of course. And I'm not even saying this to push back on what you're saying, but I'm just saying, like, this normalization. I work with kids. I teach adults and kids yoga. And I have to be honest, they're the uber privileged class. Okay. I mean, they just are. And the number of children that I work with who say to me in words that they hate their fathers because they're white men.
Yeah.
Just because they're white. I mean, that's the end of the story. There's not even I shouldn't have to defend the Jewish people as being multicultural, even if we're all white. Blanket hatred against any people is a problem. And it's interesting how even as we fight this, I'm going to say woke. I know people have a lot of issues with it, but even as people fight a lot of this woke ideology, at the same time, we reflect it in our own discourse.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Of course, I think that this whole equation is just Marxist-Leninist garbage. It's back to the whole, proletariat, it's all garbage. I don't agree with it, and it leads to the death of millions of people, right? Like, we know where this leads. But that is unfortunately what we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with them having been filled with a self-hate for so long, a self-loathing for so long, that they're coming up with, to be honest with you, I think that has a lot to do with why kids now are trying to be like, oh, I'm gender neutral, I'm a they, them, they just don't want to be a white straight person. I have to be something else. Or why so many of them are converting to Islam. I have to be something else.
Right.
Because being a white straight person has been so demonized. So they're trying to grab whatever other kinds of labels that they can so that they're not in a part of this demonized group. Obviously, the fact that they are being demonized is wrong.
Right.
But within that perverted paradigm,
right.
They have made it so that they can't see the forest for the trees. They think that they're in a Disney movie where all the good guys wear white hats and all the bad guys wear black hats, right? And they think that anytime somebody has white skin, they must be the bad guy. And anytime somebody has brown skin, they must be the good guy. And then they're sticking this Israel-Palestine conflict into that simplistic little narrative that they have without understanding one iota of what it feels like to be a Palestinian person living in Palestine, or what it feels like to be an Israeli person living in Israel, or understanding anything about the history of the land. It doesn't matter. All they have is their little TikTok meme, and everything fits into that.
Sure. And the irony, the vast irony of demonizing the whites, and that the solution is to literally join the demons.
Yeah.
Terrorists. I mean, the irony and hypocrisy cannot be understated in what's going on in the world right now. And you alluded to it, but I mean, just this past weekend, of course, and on the on the actual anniversary of the eve of Kristallnacht, right, we witnessed a literal pogrom, like a literal pogrom, like let's find Jews and beat them up and try to kill them in Amsterdam. That, by the way, went almost completely ignored or even defended by the mass media, as well as by Dutch law enforcement and their government. Anti-Semitism has become so deeply and dangerously normalized in our streets, on our campuses. And when I say our, I'm talking about the entire Western world, in the media and in our governments, that people are literally dismissing it, again, just not connecting the dots as a simple and justified social dynamic. I mean, is this all the proof we need that Islam is well on their path to victory in the West, in the world?
I hope not. I don't want to think of it that way at all. I can't let my brain go there. I feel like, if anything, this is just proving to the world why Israel needs to exist. You are just proving it over and over again. As you're screaming about how Zionism is bad, you are showing why Israel needed to send planes over to Amsterdam to rescue their citizens. Right. Because the law enforcement there couldn't do their job. They couldn't protect these Israelis. So, you are, all of these people that are supporting anything to do with the pro-Palestinism, whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, calling them freedom fighters, calling them resistance fighters, any of that, all of those people are just continuing to prove over and over and over again why there needs to be the tiniest sliver of land on this planet where Jewish people can go and actually feel safe. And it's ironic to say that, because when you're in Israel, you are very, very, acutely aware with the bomb shelters everywhere. Everybody needs to understand what to do when they hear the sirens go off. Everybody is very aware of the fact that you are in a war zone. You are surrounded by people who actively want to murder you, who are trying to get to you through any means necessary, even paragliders. So, but that is actually the safest place for Jewish people in the world.
Exactly.
And if Israel didn't exist, if it didn't exist when Jewish people are being thrown out of Yemen and Egypt and Iraq and Syria and Germany and Poland and Hungary and all over the world, where would they go? What do we want? What will make these people happy? What do they want? Get out of our land, and also don't go to Israel. So what is it?
Sure.
You just want Israeli people to just all die. You just want Jewish people to just not exist. That's it. That's the only answer that will make them happy.
Yasmine, I have to say that growing up as a Jew for 53 years, it was very hard. And as a Zionist, I did grow up in sort of like a Zionist pro-Israel world. Not sort of, I did. It's been hard for me to articulate until last not even October 8th, when the whole world turned, why Israel was so important. I knew it was important, but you just articulated that in such a clear and concise way. I can't imagine anybody not understanding that. The amount of mass immigration, particularly from France, this isn't just for people who don't understand the framework of what Yasmine just said, when she named off all of, Yemen, Egypt, Syria, etc., she's talking about the 1930s and 40s when we were all expelled. In the modern day, the mass immigration from South America, from Australia, from Europe, to Israel. I mean, you go to Tel Aviv I would say that less than 50% of the conversations are in Hebrew. I mean, it's just people who leave their, and these aren't even religious people. These are people who leave their countries just so they can be Jewish. Okay, I'm not talking about Jewish, the hats and the hair and the things. I'm talking about like me, who's half naked on a video touching men in yoga, but I am Jewish. And I would be lying if I didn't say that there has been a single day since 10/7 that my heart doesn't say, I need to be back. I need to make Aliyah. Like it is the only place, and eventually it's gonna be, or so it seems, the only place as a non-religious, but very definitely identify as a Jewish woman. So anyway, I do want to. So you're from Canada. I'm from America. And I know that because I've been to Canada so many times, like how much offense they take when I say America, because they're like, well, we're also America. I'm like, okay, well, USA, I'm going to use short form America, and I hope that that's not at all offensive.
No, not at all. Whoever got offended is weird.
Oh, I get it all the time. But the other thing is that I'm going to just, in a very unintentionally offensive way, call Canada baby America, meaning that, you guys are, I mean, you're big, but small population, not very, powerful in the world stage, but more or less a mirror of what we represent in the United States. And that's sort of like the premise that I'm going to be going on. Now also, Yasmine, I do want to say that I have been getting all the updates from Canada every day, and they're way more frightening, to be honest, than what's coming out of America. But I would love, because I'm going to speak from an American framework, I would love for you at any point to interject what you're seeing in Canada or even around the world, because I know you travel a lot. I think that one of the things that I have been sort of sounding the alarm on for, well, 23 years, 24 years, whatever, since 9/11, is that, first of all, it would be hard to argue that despite our shortcomings, there has never been a more benevolent empire. And I know, again, like words and whatever, I don't have another word for it, than the American empire, which is the protectorate of like freedom, dignity, and democracy across the globe more than any other nation. But all throughout history, every empire has fallen. The Holy Roman Empire fell, the Ottoman Empire fell, the British Empire fell, and it's a little bit of a hubris to assume that America is here to stay forever, especially watching the dynamics of what's going on around us, and especially in the United Nations, where all the countries of the world come together in one voice, which is a very anti-Western voice right now. If the US goes down, the axis of evil, Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, to me, it's a little funny to throw them in there, but North Korea will fill. There. Yeah, they are. They'll fill the vacuum, and it's going to be a dark day for all of mankind. And yet again, we have this mass movement crying for jihad and socialism and the end of democracy as we know it. I'm like thinking about our friend, and when I say our friend, what I actually mean is your friend, who I wish was my friend, Sam Harris, who says so clearly and unapologetically that sometimes there's a very bright line between good and evil. And this is one of those times. Yeah. I personally find it horrifying how deceptively and effectively evil has masqueraded as good in recent times, and how Islam is the wolf that somehow slipped in under the sheep's clothing. This month, it's hard for me to say this without chuckling, happens to be Islamophobia Awareness Month. not Muslim Awareness Month, let me point out, but Islamophobia Awareness Month, a vast Darvo weaponization of what Elika Laban calls an embargo term specifically intended to shut down all criticism or questioning of Islam. First things first, can you explain Islam and what it means to actually be Islamic instead of just being Muslim?
So Islam is the religion and Muslim is the person. So the religion of Islam teaches certain things, right? It's a doctrine, it's an ideology, it's a set of edicts. Within Islam, it is a political ideology where it teaches that Islam must rule the world and the whole planet, every human must bow to Allah, must prostrate to Allah. And so that is jihad, right? It's that inherently, when you are a Muslim, part of your, your impetus, part of the goal, part of the purpose of being a Muslim is to spread Islam. Now, people can do that in different ways. Some people do it through dawah, so through missionary work. Some people do it through the sword, through terrorism. Some people do it through more diplomatic means, like joining political groups and things like that. The people that do that, the people that respond to this call within the religion of Islam that says that you need to spread Islam across the world, those are termed Islamists. People call them Islamists. Now, in Islam, there's no separation between a Muslim and an Islamist, but that's terminology that we've created, more contemporary terminology that we've created to separate the difference between, because we're talking about 2 billion Muslims here, right? So we have to separate the difference between a Muslim who is not interested in spreading their ideology across the globe. They're just interested in minding their own business, living their own life, and not getting involved in politics. And then an Islamist who believes that this whole planet needs to be, Muslim. Everybody on the planet needs to be Muslim. Now, it is a gray area here because that's what the religion teaches. So if you consider yourself a Muslim, if you consider yourself a devout Muslim, if you consider yourself a believing Muslim, then you must believe this to be true. Even if you yourself are not willing to join any terrorist groups, you're not willing to join any political activism, you're not willing to do anything in order to push that goal forward, but you need to believe, even passively, that that is what needs to happen. And so we've got these, let's just call them 2 groups for now. Let's just say that there's the Muslims that are not interested in spreading Islam, and then the Muslims that are, and they are called Islamists.
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, within the Islamists, like I mentioned, you've got all sorts of groups. You've got the jihadis like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have the more diplomatic Islamists. You've got your Ilhan Omars, your Shadi Hamids, your, all of those folks, the Rashida Tlaib, right? The ones that are, what's his name? The one that's in Britain, Mehdi Hassan, right? On CNN, I think he is, or BBC. So these are the ones that are through media, through politics, through, advertising campaigns, through putting hijab on every flat surface in magazines and newspapers or apps or Disney movies, normalizing extremist Islam ideas and making them seem to be progressive almost, pretending that a hijab is like empowering and feminist, right? All of this kind of forked tongue propaganda So the Islamists are all over here. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of Islamists, right? Using different methods, all towards the same goal of spreading Islam. Because you know as well as I do that all of these things that they're doing are contributing to not only normalizing Islam, but causing people to, or not just normalizing extremist Islam, but causing people to be defensive and protective of extremist Islam that is dangerous to so many women and minorities and other groups. So within here, we've got the different kinds of Islamists. And then these folks over here, who are the ones that just want to mind their own business, they can't open their mouth. Because if they say, I disagree with this or I disagree with that, then they are in danger from this much larger, much more mainstream, much more powerful group over here. And if you are part of this group,
Is that just in a Muslim majority country, or do you feel like that's
no,
the same
absolutely not. This is global. I'm talking global.
even in like a moderate Muslim community in Nebraska or Los Angeles?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. You'll have the exact same thing. I have spoken to people who used to be imams in states across America and in Canada, all over France, Sweden, everywhere. This is what it is. And so if you are a liberal thinker, an open-minded person who believes in, freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, believes that everybody should just believe whatever they want to believe, and that's none of my business. Everybody can eat whatever they want to eat. That's none of my business. Everybody can wear whatever they want to wear. It's none of my business. If you are a Muslim who believes these things, you need to keep your mouth shut when you are in a Muslim community. You need to keep your mouth shut because you are going to be putting yourself in danger. If you believe that Jewish people are not pigs and apes and should be killed, you need to keep your mouth shut in a Muslim community, right? It's very dangerous for any of these good-hearted Muslims to open their mouth. They are in just as much danger as someone like me who has renounced Islam entirely, because any criticism, any slight criticism of Islam is dangerous. Now, having said that, there are many brave people who they call themselves Muslim reformers. They believe that they should practice their religion in a way that fits in a democracy in 2024.
Sure.
So they want to get rid of all of the anti-Semitic, all of the homophobic, all of the racist, all of the violent, all of the misogynist, all of these edicts within their religion. They renounce them, but they want to keep their faith.
But
right?
then don't they
Those
have
are,
to throw away the Quran? I
you'd
mean,
think,
isn't that
but they are finding a way to, they're trying to find a way to be on the fence and to keep their faith
Okay.
without all of the horrible things that come with it.
Is,
But they have a very big challenge ahead of them. It's not
sure.
a challenge that I'm interested in joining because like I said, I threw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't think that I am not on the fence on this at all. I think it's very clear which side is good and which side is not. But they want to keep their faith for whatever reason. Now, a lot of times it has to do with just family or, whatever. They have their own reasons. But what's important to note about these people is they are mostly only in Western countries,
Right.
because it's not safe to speak out like that in a non-Muslim or in a Muslim majority country. And even in non-Muslim countries, it's still very dangerous for them to speak their mind.
Isn't this in just from what I understand, because I have friends in both faiths, isn't this more or less how the Druze and Baha'i communities came about?
Well, they would not agree with that. No, I don't think so. So the Druze and the Baha'is, to be perfectly honest with you, are not Muslims at all.
No, I know
But they have to add Baha'i Muslim Druze, Muslim, they have to add it to keep their heads attached to their necks. If
Exactly.
they
Yeah, that's
yes,
exactly the point I'm
yeah.
saying. It's basically exactly what you're saying is like they want this piece of being Muslim, of being a part of Islam, but they don't want this piece, and therefore they give it a different name and they land somewhere.
Kind of, except that they don't want anything to do with Islam. They're not Muslims at all. But what
Right,
happened is they're a minority group that's living in a Muslim majority country.
right,
And so if you are of a minority religion, or if you are of any other religion, you're not going to find Jews and Christians, right? Like in Muslim majority countries.
right,
So if you are any other religion, you are in danger. So if you are a Druze person living in Yemen, or sorry, in Syria or in Lebanon,
yeah,
you will add Muslim. You will say, I'm a Druze Muslim. You're not a Muslim at all, but you're
exactly.
adding that there just to stay alive. So it has nothing to do with Islam.
No, but I mean, if you go back far enough, aren't both of their origins aren't they Islamic dissidents? Aren't they? Aren't they both branches that said we don't want to be a part of this anymore and we're going to create a different?
No, it's my understanding that they are their own people, like Yazidis, for example. You know, there's many, because before Islam came and colonized with the sword, there was many different ethnic groups, many different religious groups, right? But because they were so dominant and because they were so violent, people had to either convert to Islam or hide their faith
Right,
or pretend that they're Muslim. I
uh,
mean, Jewish people
right,
did that in Iran for 120 years,
sure,
right? And so they pretended that they were Muslim on the outside. So that's basically Baha'i, Druze. That's what they're doing, is they are just adding the word Muslim. But you know, this, I'm saying this now, I'm going to be like outing a whole bunch of Druze people that are, you know, but they, or Baha'i people, they know this, but the truth is that it's not safe for me to even be saying this, because they need to add
right,
Muslim to their religion in order to stay alive, because are if they are recognized as non-Muslims, they will be killed.
right, sure. In which comes which comes full circle back to the concept of Islamophobia. It is Islamophobia Awareness Month, so I am like just always so fascinated with with nomenclature and in the evolution of words. And I find it ironic that it's actually the Islamists that came up with the word Islamophobia, because
Exactly.
it literally means, I mean, if anyone cares, it literally means the fear of Islam. Phobia means fear. Okay. If they wanted to call it hatred of, like the moral equivalent of anti-Semitism, it would be anti-Islamism. It wouldn't be Islamophobia. This is
Not even. It's
it,
Muslim.
right.
And there's so many things here, Shauna. I have to
Yeah.
say, like,
Yeah.
first of all, because people always do this comparison with anti-Semitism, which drives me up the wall.
Yeah.
When we're talking about Jewish people, we're talking about an ethnic group. We're talking about a tribe of people. This is their immutable characteristic. This is who they are.
Right.
I am not a Muslim. I may have been a Muslim for, more than half my life, but I am not a Muslim today. It is an ideology. It is a belief. It is not an immutable characteristic. So just like you can be, conservative, you can be liberal, you can be communist, you can be a vegan, you can be this, you can be that. And also you can choose to not be any of those things. A
Sure.
Muslim is the exact same thing. A Jewish person can't wake up in the morning one day and say, I don't want to be Jewish anymore. No, it's who you are,
Right.
right? It's like so it's apples and oranges, right? First of all. And then second of
And I
all,
am saying also that, I just so you know, I am making apples and oranges argument here. I am in no way equivocating these two things. But
yeah,
yeah,
no, I don't mean this for you. I mean like for
yeah,
everybody
yeah,
listening who might be confused, because people like to equate anti-Semitism and
sure,
Islamophobia, and they're not remotely the same thing. So that's the first problem. The second problem with equating these two things is anti-Semitism does not utter a word about the religion of Judaism. 90% of Jewish people are secular, right? I don't know what the percentage of Jewish people are atheist. This is not about religion. This is not about protecting a religion from criticism. Islamophobia, however, does not refer to the people at all who are the Muslims. It's referring to Islam, the religion. It is protecting the religion from criticism. It is protecting the ideology from criticism. If you want to protect the people, then you would call it anti-Muslim bigotry. That's what you would call it, right? Or anti-Arab bigotry or anti-Indonesian bigotry or just bigotry, just racism, right? These terms already exist. We don't need something new. But if you want to specifically talk about anti-religious bigotry against Muslim people, then you can do that. But to coin it, Islamophobia, you know exactly what you're doing. And like you said, it is Islamists themselves that coined this term, because they can control you if you're in Iran or Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Afghanistan or Jordan or anywhere else in the Muslim majority world. They can imprison you, they can execute you, they can torture you and your family, right? They can shut you up, make sure that you never criticize their religion. But how are they going to reach you? How are they going to reach you if you're in Germany or France or in Ireland or in America or Canada? What can they do? So they came up with this term, which sounds a lot like xenophobia, homophobia, all of these terms on the left that they knew would jump on it like useful idiots and say, ooh, that's another one of these words where we're protecting a minority group, right? Yeah. And that's exactly what they did. They jumped on it and literally, as useful idiots, running around, shutting people up who are trying to criticize this ideology that is exactly the opposite of their values. These are people that say, I champion LGBT equality. Well, then why are you shutting up people who are talking about the fact that 15 Muslim majority countries will execute people for being gay, and the rest of them will criminalize you for being gay? Why are you shutting up conversations about feminism, about women who don't want to be thrown in prison over a piece of cloth? Why are you shutting down all of these conversations about female genital mutilation, about child marriage? You pretend to care about women, you pretend to care about feminism, yet you're championing the absolute worst ideology for women on the planet today. You're pretending to champion freedom and peace, but then you are supporting the worst ideology against freedom and against peace on the planet today. It is so inverted. It is so perverted. It is just, it's mind-blowing, the level of ignorance that's required, the level of cognitive dissonance that's required for these folks to continue down this path.
I mean, it's pretty astounding that George Orwell called this out in 1948. He already saw it. You know, growing up, I mean, I'm older than you, but, you know, reading the book 1984, right around the year 1984, it seemed like war is peace. What? Like, this is ridiculous. This kid, and then I'm like, oh, well, we actually live in a world where men are women, black is white, you know, war is peace. War is peace. I mean, it's just, it's crazy in this post-factual, and there is no other word for it. You're right, inverted but Orwellian society, how little reality even matters anymore. Like, reality is subjective now. Facts are subjective. There's nothing is true anymore. It's just a matter of, well, I respect your ideas, you respect my ideas. I see this as freedom fighting, you see it as terrorist massacre. Like, let's call the whole thing off. Potato, potato. We're all good people here, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, that really was for me when I saw Shani Luke on the back of that truck, because they filmed their own atrocities because they are proud of themselves. So that shows you what their mindset is, right?
Sure.
And when I saw that, I thought to myself, well, this is it.
That's right.
Everybody will get it now. There's no question. It's clear as the light of day. Like now everyone will understand. I was not expecting somehow for people to find a way to excuse and justify the rape of women, the murder of people, the kidnapping of people. I just couldn't, I don't know how like so many parents failed. That's all I can say is like we just failed that any human being could find any moral ambiguity in this equation. It's so clear, you know?
It is so clear, but the moral, what you and I would in our friend Sam would call moral ambiguity isn't moral ambiguity at all. To them, it's clear as day. The Jews are responsible for what happened on 10/7. Israel holds, I mean, as Harvard would say, full responsibility for these atrocities. And let's keep in mind, it's not just the atrocities. It's not just how they treated Shani's body after she was killed. It's not just that they kidnapped her dead body, but how the good people, the innocent people of Gaza reacted as they paraded her raped and broken dead body through the streets, and people cheered and spat on her as if this was the greatest conquest that they possibly could have imagined. And I also, Yasmine, when it's very kind of you to say we have failed as parents, because I understand that there is a certain collective responsibility. And we are all very much the product of our upbringing and our experiences. And I think most people become slaves to these circumstances. And then there are the few people like you who are compelled to break free of them and like blaze your own unshackled path. I mean, you are one of those rare few. And let me just pivot for a second here, because for anyone who isn't already aware of your story and where you came from and how you got to where you are now. And by the way, I encourage everyone to buy Yasmine's harrowing and inspiring memoir, Unveiled. Yasmine, I know this is the big question that probably gets so annoying, but can you give us the highlight reel of baby Yasmine to today Yasmine?
Sure. Yeah, I'll do my best. But like you mentioned, it's all detailed in my book, which I've got both the French and the I think this is Italian copies here, but I don't have English for some reason.
That's amazing.
But it's the same cover. It's called Unveiled. But yeah, so the highlight reel is that my dad was born in Gaza. My mom was born in Cairo, Egypt. They met in university in Egypt when Gaza was under Egyptian authority. And so when we're talking about this whole Israel-Palestine conflict, this is a conflict that has been part of my life from birth. In fact, my first passport, my name was Philistine, which is Arabic for Palestine. That was my name on my first passport until my mom changed it because the word Philistine in English is not very nice. So she's like, raising my kid in Canada with that name is not going to work. And so they changed
It
it
might
to
today. Go on.
yeah. Anyway, so they met in Cairo, Egypt, got married, moved to San Francisco, California, had my sister, and then moved to Vancouver, where they had my brother and I, and then their marriage fell apart. And so my dad moved to Montreal, which is the other side of Canada, and my mom became the second wife to what we are now terming an Islamist. And so this was during the 80s, when it was like just this trajectory was just forming of Islamist activity, of political Islam. It all started with the Islamic regime of Iran. And then it was like all the other countries across the Middle East. It just all started spreading like wildfire. So that's why you'll see videos and pictures of like Afghanistan and Libya and Iran and Egypt, et cetera, in the 70s, in the 60s. You wouldn't see a hijab. You would see men and women mixing in universities and in coffee shops, and you would see like a normal secular society. But early 80s and definitely into the 90s, it had, this Islamist idea had spread, which is the idea of Islam is the answer. Islam is what we should be striving for, and that is like interwoven with like pro-Islam, anti-West. Pro-Islam, anti-West, you like in just like completely intertwined. And so my mom jumped on that pro-Islam, anti-West bandwagon. And she became a scholar of Islamic studies. She went to Al-Azhar University. She became the head of the Islamic studies department at the Islamic school where I had to go. I was put in hijab at 9 years old. And then, like you said, I was actually forced into the marriage with this Al-Qaeda terrorist at 19, but that was the Islamic marriage, and then the legal Canadian marriage was at 20. And then when I had a daughter with him, like you said, I finally found the courage to get out because I needed to protect her from living the same life that I had lived, or even worse life than I had lived. And so through a series of very complicated events, I was able to get away from him, get away from my mom, go to university, get a place by myself, which is like hugely improper. Like that's like complete dishonor on my mom, and the whole community knew her and knew that her daughter, like only whores live by themselves. You either live with your father or you live with your husband. But I managed to get out. And when I was in university, I took a history of religions course, which focused on the 3 monotheistic religions. And I honestly took it on a whim. I took it because I thought, well, I've got a third of this curriculum down. As my mom is the head of Islamic studies department at the Islamic school, as her kids, we needed to know the curriculum inside out because, of course, we couldn't shame her. And so I thought, well, you know what, this could be an easy A. And so I took the course. And my professor was Lebanese. Now, I don't know if he was Lebanese Christian, Lebanese ex-Muslim, Lebanese, I don't know. I just know he was Lebanese. And because of that, we had like a kinship. Like I didn't feel threatened by him when he would like push certain ahadith to me and be like, read this.
And you were still wearing the burqa at this point, correct?
Oh, yes. I was still wearing the hijab. Yeah, so I had taken off the niqab. So I did when I was married to him, and for years afterwards wore a face covering as well, and the gloves. But I went back to everything covered except for my face and hands.
Okay.
And so he allowed me, this Lebanese professor allowed me for the first time in my life to critically analyze my religion. I was allowed to question. In fact, it was encouraged that I question. And that's something that is absolutely unacceptable. In fact, you're punished severely if I tried to do that in Islamic school. And so it didn't take long for the thread to unravel, because once you start to actually study the religion with an open mind, especially when you're comparing it to other religions, and we even brought in just like pagan religions as well, because Muhammad did a lot of copying and pasting. He's just a plagiarist, right? He just grabbed a whole bunch of things from everywhere. And you can clearly see that when you're studying this academically, right? And so as I'm intellectually being bombarded with all this information, 9/11 happens.
Okay.
So now I'm being bombarded emotionally as well, because within my community, within my family, within, I still had a relationship with my mom at this point, where my daughter would
Oh,
still stay with my mom. Yeah. I
oh,
was still a
right,
Muslim.
that crossed over. Okay.
Yeah. And so my mom would take care of my daughter when I would be going to university sometimes. And so we still had a relationship. And she, along with everyone in the community, was joyous after 9/11. Just there was such a sense of just a boost of morale, and I remember having a few conversations with my mom where I was like, but there is a daycare center. Like, even what about the babies there? Are they? She's like, it doesn't matter. They're babies. They'll go to heaven. Like, who cares? They're martyrs. Like, she had an excuse for everything.
Right.
Anything that I said, she'd just dismiss it, and she didn't want anything to infringe on her joy of this happy occasion. And I realized during that time that I had saved my daughter physically, but I now had to save her mentally. There was no way that I could raise her in a community, in a family, in an ideology that celebrates death like this. And it was then, that it was that the end of that year when I realized, like, I can't be Muslim anymore. I can't do this. Like, none of it makes sense. All of it is a lie. All of it is wrong. And I felt sick at the thought of raising my daughter with these beliefs. And so, leaving Islam is a crime punishable by execution. So you have 3 days to repent, and if you don't, you are to be killed. So that is the point. So it was like I didn't want to be Muslim anymore, but I started, I took off my hijab. I started to have non-Muslim friends. I started drinking. Do you know what I mean? Like I was living this life of like not being a Muslim anymore, but without actually proclaiming I'm not a Muslim anymore. But it was at that point when my mom threatened to have me killed because she realized that I was on my way out.
Look,
And
and,
that's when I cut ties with her.
and where is this on the timeline of your daughter asking you when she is going to be cleaned?
That is the point that made me
Okay.
leave his house. So
So,
when him
wait,
and my mom,
okay.
way back before that, when him and my mom were having the conversation about taking her to Egypt, so she was just a newborn baby at that time. And I didn't really know what they were talking about because that's not something that's done in my family. Like at that point, it was done in like 90% of families in Egypt, including his, but that it wasn't common in my family. So I didn't immediately know what he was talking about until my mom said, oh, no, no, no. When she's like 6 or 7 years old, we'll take her to Egypt and we'll get it done there. And then that's when I clued in. I was like, this horrible woman is willing to take my daughter and have this done to her to please this man. Like you're willing to, the two of them were conspiring about taking my perfect, beautiful newborn baby and figuring out when they were going to be able to get a razor blade to her genitals to cut off her clitoris. Like it's beyond diabolical. And that is the moment when I realized I have to get away. I have to get away from him. And I got away from him, and then I got away from my mom afterwards. Now, again, like I mentioned, my dad moved to the other side of the country. She was my only parent. I was still stuck in a narcissistic loop where I wanted her love. I wanted her approval. I wanted her to be proud of me, but I wanted also to live my life, right? But because my mom is a narcissist, it's a black hole. There's never going to be enough. You'll never do enough to please her. And I realized that after I wore niqab, I married the man she told me to marry. I endured him raping me. I endured him beating me. I endured everything that her and Allah told me that I needed to endure as a good Muslim woman. I endured wearing that niqab, being imprisoned in the house. I endured it all. And it still wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. And there was no way that I was going to be able to raise my daughter in a healthy environment and also have my mom in my life. Like it was never going to happen. And so I had to choose. I had to choose between basically our life, our happiness, or hers. And that's why one of the reasons why we cut ties, but also because she threatened to have me killed.
Yeah, I would probably cut ties with my mom on those grounds as well.
I believed her, I believed her. I knew she was not. The thing is when people say this as hyperbole, like, oh, my mom's trying to kill me. Oh, my dad wants to kill me. When we talk about it in an Islamic context, it is not hyperbole. Honor violence and honor killings are so incredibly common and normalized. And it's the girl that is demonized. It's
Right.
the victim that is demonized. And it's the perpetrators of the crimes. It's the killers. They're the ones who are held up as righteous because they restored the family honor.
It it, it it's so hard, like for me to even, there are a few holes I do want to fill in for people who aren't familiar with your story, but the way you use the word that they conspired, I mean, the fact that when she found you, your husband, it was you could tell it or I could tell it, but that was because she finally found a man who could control you. And so if
Correct.
that's not a conspiracy right there, I see them, like, hey, we're here to take control over it. But so you leave him, but she stays in your life. I mean, how does that even happen? And does she stay in contact with him? I mean, how did she allow you to leave him and
She
still,
didn't. She
but
didn't
still
have
be in your
a
life?
say.
Right.
Yeah, so at that point I was the horrible daughter, like I was getting divorced, which was a shame on the family because in Islam a man is the one who divorces a woman. A woman, there's no mechanism for her to get divorced, right? And so if a divorce happens, the automatic assumption is he divorced her because there's something wrong with her. Maybe she's not a virgin, maybe she doesn't cook properly, whatever the stupid thing is that they're going to come up with,
Right.
it's her fault, it's her problem. And so when a divorce happens, it's an automatic shame on the woman and the woman's family.
Sure.
So not only was I divorcing him, which was shameful, I was moving out on my own, which was also shameful. I was going to university, which she was so against. I was working, I was doing all of these things that were completely against what she wanted me to be, everything that she had raised me to be. And she had, like you said, she had married me off to this man because he was strong enough to control me, because my whole life was a series of me trying to stand up for myself, trying to be an individual, trying to have some sort of sense of autonomy, and then being shot down by her. And so she felt, well, if I marry her off to a terrorist, he'll finally be able to keep her in check, right? Yeah. And it worked. It worked for a few
Sure.
years,
Sure.
But once I got rid of the terrorist, I was in that gray area where I didn't really want to be Muslim and I didn't really want to have my mom in my life, but I was scared and I was alone and I was a single mom with a high school education. And like, you know, I was not a fully fledged woman that you see in front of you today. You know what I mean? I was still a broken girl from an abusive family and an abusive marriage who's trying to hobble a life together for herself and her daughter, you know, while dealing with, you know, trauma and panic attacks. And you know what I mean? It was a very difficult time. But as I healed and as I got stronger and as I started to have more confidence in myself and to trust my instincts more, that's when, I mean, I'm talking about a span of maybe like less than 2 years, right?
Sure.
That I was able to finally break away completely and stand on my own 2 feet and then be just me and my daughter against the world.
Okay, now as we're closing in on an hour and a half, I'm like, okay, I have 5,000 questions left. So I want to go one more into your life, and then I want to pivot back to a little bit about anti-Semitism and in sort of the future of Western civilization. But you didn't mention the court case. Now, it's funny because when I think about your story, to me, and that's just to me, obviously you know better than I do, that was like the pivot point where you sort of woke up and said, but wait, there's something really rotten in Denmark. Can you explain to, because I don't want to have to explain your story.
Yeah, sure.
Not
Well,
only what happened, but also like what were the ramifications of this? How was that court case the impetus that, I mean, I think it was the impetus that really turned you into the bold and impassioned activist you are today, that woke you up, so to speak.
yeah, so I'll have to rewind just a little bit and tell you that when my mom married this man, I was about 5 or 6 years old. And up until then, you know, we'd had visitation with my dad. He'd take us to McDonald's, he'd take us to the aquarium. Like, you know, there was a semblance of normalcy in our lives. And when he entered our lives, this man that my mom married, that she became the second wife to, second concurrent wife to, he deemed everything to be haram. Haram means religiously forbidden. So suddenly I was not allowed to play with my non-Muslim friends. This was something I did every day after school. You know, I grabbed my Barbies, walk down the hallway to Chelsea and Lindsay's. They'd have their little, you know, little pink plastic suitcases of Barbie stuff, and we trade shoes and clothing. This was like the highlight of my life. Suddenly, can't have non-Muslim friends anymore. You can't play with your best friends anymore. You can't ride your bike anymore. You can't go swimming anymore. You can't celebrate birthdays anymore. Literally anything that brings joy to a child of that age, everything was haram, 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 haram. And one of the things that he did was, my mom used to play records in our house. She loved country music. We always had like Dolly Parton, Kenny Rogers, Hank Williams playing in the house. And I loved that record player and I loved that music. And he also deemed music to be haram. It's from the devil. And he took my mom's records and he broke them. And he handed the shards to us and he said, break this. And at that point, my mom was standing right next to him, just eyes down in the carpet, letting this man enter our home and break her things. And she wasn't reacting. That was a huge pivotal moment for me, because if my brother had walked into my room and started breaking my Barbies, I'd be livid, right? But she didn't react. It was okay for this man to enter our house and break her stuff. And she didn't do anything about it. So basically, that was sending us the message that A, he's the new sheriff in town. right? His rules are now what are going to apply. And B, your mom is useless. She's not going to protect you. She's not going to even protect herself. And so when he started beating us and later sexually abusing me, even telling my mom about these things was pointless because she did nothing to protect me. Like I said, she wouldn't even protect herself. And so that was the moment. I think I was so young, but that's what I always felt such, resentment, such a feeling of, like I really wish that my mom would snap out of it. I really hoped that she would snap out of it and that life would go back to the way it was. That was my plan. That was my hope. And so all of those years when he was abusing us and he was forcing us to read Quran and forcing us to pray and forcing us to do all these things, I always saw him as the bad one, the evil one. And I saw my mom as a victim, basically, that she couldn't even protect herself. So how was she going to protect me? Like I didn't see her as a co-conspirator in this abuse. And so when I was able to go to a public school, so what happened was the Islamic school that I was going to didn't have a high school at the time because of Saudi money was coming in and they built an elementary school, but they hadn't yet built a high school. And so I was allowed to go to high school for grade 8. I was allowed to go to a public high school. And so I was 12 or 13 years old. And at the end of that year, my mom found out that I had non-Muslim friends at school because I was supposed to go to school with a hijab on and be ostracized from everybody and to not make friends with any non-Muslims. But she found out that I had non-Muslim friends, not boys, just girls. She didn't know about the boys, but just knowing that I had friends that were non-Muslim was enough for her to say, you are not going to go back to a public school next year. You are going to be homeschooled. And so when I went back to school, I was really scared and sad and desperate because going to a public school was the first breath of oxygen I'd had since this man entered our lives. And my teacher, Mr. Fabro, who wrote the foreword for my book, by the way, came to me and he said, is everything okay? You seem different. Something's wrong. He was my drama teacher. So it's a kind of class that you get to know your teacher on a more personal level. And he recognized that something was truly off. And I told him everything. I showed him the bruises. I showed him the welts. I told him about how he would hang me upside down in the garage and whip me. I told him everything. And so he alerted the police alerted child services, and then it became this huge investigation, and it became this court case. And at the end of all of this, the judge said to me, it's just your culture. That's the way your family chooses to discipline you, then so be it. So basically what he was telling me was, if you were sitting in front of me, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl whose family came from Ireland or Scotland or whatever, then I would protect you. Mm-hmm. But because you are a brown-skinned girl whose family comes from Egypt and your background is Muslim, then this is just your lot in life and you're going to have to endure. And it was at that moment, actually, Shana, when I felt like there was no hope in the world ever, because I had done the unthinkable at this point. Because if you think of in a mafia, the rat is the worst kind of person. It's the person who goes to the authorities to tell on the in-group. Right. And that's what I did. As far as they were concerned, I was the rat because I went to the non-Muslims for help from my Muslim family. Like it was the most treacherous thing that they could have possibly imagined. And so for me to have done that at such a young age, and then to have the judge throw me back into the lion's den, what am I going to do? Who am I going to go to? So I truly believed that this was Allah's will, and I can't change my destiny, and I don't have any control over my life, because who else am I going to go to? What
Right.
else am I going to do? What else is in my power? I had nothing else. So that's when I fell into a really dark depression. And that was the first time that I tried to commit suicide. I could see no light anywhere in any direction. Now in Islam, if you commit suicide, you go straight to hell. And so I was scared of going straight to hell, but I also did not want to continue living in this life. And so I was stuck in between two dark holes. It was the worst period of my life. And she did as she promised. She kept me home the next year. I wasn't allowed to go back to school. And if you can just imagine the humiliation of like, oh, you tried to go to the cops, did you? You thought the judges would help you, did you? Oh,
I,
you thought that your Canadian government was going to come and help you, did you? Well, look at you now, right?
right.
So it was like on top of the abuse, there was also that kind of just taunting,
Yeah.
ridiculing. It was unbearable. And yeah, and that's what my Canadian government did for me.
And
But I have to say, yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say this is what people don't understand about multiculturalism is that in their view they're protecting your culture, but in so doing they literally threw you back to risk your life in a way that, as you say, they never would have done to a blonde hair, blue-eyed kid. And again, it just comes back to even today, like how blind the left is to these ideals that they think represent some sort of morality that is literally the antithesis of everything they think they stand for.
Absolutely correct. 100% correct. This moral relativism, this cultural relativism, it's absolutely toxic. Right is right, wrong is wrong. Abuse is abuse, regardless of the ethnicity of the child or the religion of that child's family. None of that is relevant. But this is the same bullshit that they pull when they excuse things like what happened on October 7th, right? When they try to find these justifications. And when they twist things that should be very clear, that like I said, that there should be no moral ambiguity in these situations, right? But they find a way to protect the perpetrators of the crimes and to demonize the victims, or to leave the victims unsupported, unseen, unheard. This is what happened with the Yazidis in Syria. Everybody was taking in Syrian people all over the globe. Who was caring about the Yazidis? The Yazidis that were being bought and sold. The women and daughters were being bought and sold in sex slave markets, right? The little boys were being taken as and being raised as Muslims, right? Or people just outright being shot in the head and having mass graves. Who was talking about the Yazidis at that time? Nobody. Everybody was concerned about the Muslim Syrians with 4 wives and 7 children. Those are the people that we were inviting all over the planet. Nobody was looking at the gay Syrians, the atheist Syrians, like all of the other minority groups, right? They get ignored not only within, obviously, a Muslim majority culture or country or society, but they're being ignored by the West as well.
Yeah. It's 10:20. I want to respect your time. How are you feeling about continuing the conversation? Where do you have to be?
Yeah. Yeah, no, go for it.
Okay, cool. That's always a dangerous thing to say to me, by the way, because I'm like, okay. I'm like scrolling, going, okay, well, which questions do I get into? Okay. So it, so just piggybacking on that concept, I think that the thing that's so confounding to most of us, and it seems like you've got some clarity on things that the rest of us are really, really struggling to find any clarity on, is considering how far apart, and they couldn't be further apart, the values of Islam are from the left. Like, honestly, like how did Islam hijack the left? Now, I know that one thing I have to give them credit for is that their strategy is long term in a way that the rest of the world just can't even conceive of. Like Islam has no problem with a 3 century long strategy wherein we're like, we need ceasefire now, today, get the hostages free, game over, peace on earth. So they're willing to be patient. They're willing to do what they need to do. And in fact, I had written a sort of a debriefer on SJP around 15 years ago. And even back then, before people even understood what they were, I'm like, okay, well, they literally spent over a decade doing nothing but creating alliances, nothing. And then one day they're like, oh, we have this one small ask. Are you willing to stand with us against Israel? And they were willing to put in those years of just like subversive so the broader strategy of Islam to take over the world. Again, I mean, if you look into it, and you know way better than I do, but it's 100 years old strategy. The left, though, like the left, it hurts my head every day. Every day that I wake up, I just can't conceive of how they were able to hijack
Yeah.
the good people of the world, so to speak.
They were able to hijack them because they have done it before in the past successfully so many times. I mean, the Islamic regime of Iran is only in power now because of this alliance that they had with the left. They had an alliance with communists and socialists in Iran to bring down the Shah, to bring down the monarchy. And so they used whatever terminology they needed to use. They used whatever kind of shared alliances, shared goals that they have, which is here and now it's bring down America, bring down democracy, bring down Western civilization, right?
But
So
why
that's
does
what,
it come across as bring down the Jews? Like, why is it that most people, if you say, what does Islam hate more than anything? Like, they don't get it. They're burning American flags, but all they see is Israel, regardless of Israel's, the problem, Israel's this, but when people think about radical Islam, mostly they think about destroying Israel and the Jews. They don't even see
well,
the Western component.
they say death to America first before they say death to Israel. The only reason why we're even talking about Israel right now is because of proximity,
That's right.
because opportunity. That's all it is. It's not like they haven't done anything in America or in France or in Sweden or in Germany or in Canada. They're doing everything that they can, right? Anytime there is an opportunity, they take it. So it's just opportunity is all it is. It's not that they hate only Jewish people or only Israel. And then once they get rid of Israel, everything's going to be kumbaya. Absolutely not. Like that. That's a ridiculous thing to even think in a post 9/11 world, right? For people to even consider that, right? But what I want to go back to is this alliance. So remember when I told you that my mom got onto this train, which is very pro-Islam, anti-West. It's like this, pro-Islam, anti-West. And so when you have other groups that are anti-West, they have that alliance together. They may not have the pro-Islam side, but they're going to make an alliance with the anti-West side. And then together, they're going to reach their goal. And that's what happened in Iran. And that's why when the Islamic regime of Iran finally did get rid of the Shah and did take over the country, one of the first things that they did was murder tens of thousands of socialists and communists, the leaders of all of these groups, all of the people that they had allied with were either killed or imprisoned, or they had to, some of them were able to flee the country, right? So that's what happened with their allies, right? They are useful idiots. And when they were not useful anymore, they got rid of them. And the same story, the same alliance can be seen in Syria, in Egypt, in Palestine, in Lebanon. It's all over the Middle East. This is not their first rodeo.
Oh,
This
and
is absolutely not their first rodeo. When you saw Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, you knew what was coming. Well, I did anyway. A lot of us saw it, right? Because they're on the left. They're singing the left slogans. They're acting as if they are so progressive. They're playing that game, right? And part of, unfortunately, these groups, one of the things that they have in common is their anti-Semitism. Yes, their anti-West sentiment, but also their anti-Semitism, right? Marxists and right, they hate Jewish people. And so they have that same, that's another point where their ideologies intertwine and where they find support of each other. And so, of course, when it comes to all of this anti-Israel rhetoric, they are singing in chorus, singing in unison.
well, I do want to add to that list of states, so to speak, that they've hijacked, the United Nations. I mean, this is where the famous Zionism is racism, which has since been overturned, but resolution came in the UN specifically when the Islamic states aligned with the communist states and created an unstoppable bloc. And from that emerged this vast anti-Semitism that has absolutely characterized the United Nations ever since, even though luckily we have the United States that vetoes everything. Without the United States, and that's another thing I worry about and I want to talk about. I mean, I don't know how Israel could exist, not only physically, but also just diplomatically, the way that this so they're murdering the leftists within their nation, but they rely on the leftists in the United Nations and in diplomatic circles in order to further their agenda. So again, like the ironies, the hypocrisies, they're so extensive. It's hard to wrap your head around them. But I understand that on a broader scale of global geopolitics, but we're talking about, a predominance of the kid, I call them kids, I'm 53, in America under 30 believe that Israel is the bad guy versus I'll say Hamas because it's where it all started, but we know that that's like a pan-Iranian regime, umbrella term at this point. But these are kids that have been the ethnic studies curriculum. I think there's so much focus on what's going on our college campuses that people don't even realize that this is starting in kindergarten with like woke baby, in these books that from the moment they're born, they're like, hey, look, white bad, brown good, Jew bad, brown good, Israel bad, terrorist good, and it's like we see it going on in Gaza and in the Sesame Street, Muppets tell, I'm not literally, I love Sesame Street. I love Sesame Street, but their equivalent of Sesame Street Muppets, telling the kids, we kill Jews wherever we find them. And we look at them with horror from the West. And at the same time, we allow our kids to go to schools that tell them the same thing in board books, picture books, and they're growing up with it. This is not a Harvard problem. These kids didn't show up at Harvard with open minds and then say, oh no, never mind, we hate Jews, we hate Israel. Again, like the kids that I work with day in and day out, this is sort of funny because I have like 20-foot ceilings in my home, and I have literally an Israeli flag that comes over into like the main area in my house off the loft. And I mean, I've had, particularly in the last year, I mean, literally half my clients have left me because of, you don't want to know the words that they've used. Yoga people, like the left, like social justice, whatever, because I support the Jewish state. And again, it's like, dude, did you forget 10/7? Like, I just can't even understand, like, how they double down on their anti-Semitic tropes. And as they're doubling down, denying that they're anti-Semitic. And it's like, do you hear the words that are coming out of your mouth? Do you like where is this coming from? And it's like, again, I'm a generation older than you are. When I was in high school, and this was in the 80s, so way before things went off the rail. In fact, I went to Cornell, which is like among the worst of the worst right now, as far as, condoning the anti-Semitism that's taken over their jihadi school. I saw nothing of it while I was there. There was one weird incident it was a Holocaust in Ireland, and that's it. But when I was in high school, I remember learning about theoretically, because when you're in high school, things are very simple, right? This linear political spectrum, right? There's a line that goes from left to right. And even then, I was like shocked by how minimal or non-existent the differentiation was between the far left and the far right. In fact, I couldn't really wrap my head around it, and nobody really had an answer, because back then things were very linear. And I think that, like, the more I think about it, I think this is probably the reason for the gross misclassification of radical Islam as a progressive left movement, because among other things, I mean, when I was a kid, and for a decade or two after that, anti-Semitism was almost exclusively a plague of the right, the Nazis, okay, the KKK. And now, of course, it's predominantly coming from the left. It doesn't mean it disappeared from the right, but the ensuing political continuum has finally closed the circle, and left has become right. And I think with the polls joined, and why did they join? They joined because they both, okay, I'm Jewish, this is biased. I know you're going to say something different. They both hate Jews. I know you're going to say they hate the West, but I think that the Jews are an easy scapegoat for the West, and they may not realize they hate the West because they think that it's the Jews, but it's because, they appropriate the West to the Jews, and we represent the worst of everything that the West, which is the best set of ideology on earth, perfect, represents. To be honest, it scares me that the right has now been coronated as the saviors of the Jewish people. I'm not confident this is going to end well. I mean, do you believe, and I know we sort of discussed this before briefly, but do you believe that Jews ultimately are going to be safe anywhere outside of Israel in the long run? Because the left and the right are going to run with us.
No, I completely agree with you, and the answer is an unequivocal no. And I think most Jewish people realize that now. You're not going to find a home and safety on the left in America, and you're certainly not going to find it on the right in America. You're not going to find it in any political camp. You will be used insofar as whether it's as a scapegoat or whether it's as a bludgeon or whatever it is. But it's very difficult for me to say this because I went through this exact same thing. I mean, it was in 2016 when I wrote my article about how brokenhearted I was to see the Women's March against Trump at the time, where they took an American flag, which is your most quintessential symbol of freedom, and they perversely contorted it into a hijab, which is the most anti-freedom thing you could possibly do with the American flag. And that was their poster. That was their poster for this Women's March, which was, of course, planned by Linda Sarsour, which is another one of these Islamists that I was talking to you about, who parrot the words of the left, who act as if they're all about like anti-colonialism, what do you your whole, how do you think 57 countries on the planet are speaking Arabic and are Muslim right now? How did that happen? How did that happen? Rainbows and butterflies?
Right.
You are the biggest colonialists, right? Like this is what they do. They want to colonize more of the world. They are angry that they lost Spain. They are angry that they lost Greece. They want this. That's what the river to the sea means, is they want Israel. They want everybody's land, right? So for them to be parroting these, whatever needs to be said to get the support, the mainstream support of people on the left, any kinds of lies, obfuscation, duplicitousness, it's all fair game. But yeah, when that happened, that's, for somebody who grew up on the far right and who ran to the left, oh, I ran like with nothing but my life.
Right.
And I was like, I'm here. I agree with your values.
Right.
I believe in freedom of expression and everything. And they were like, fuck you. You're an Islamophobe. You're hateful. You're this, you're that. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, what? Where do I go? Where do I belong? Who are my people? Where am I not hated? Where am I not demonized?
Right.
And
Very much
it is,
so.
yeah, but I mean, this is why a lot of ex-Muslims now, we say like, where's our Israel? Like, that's why I recognize, intimately understand the need for Israel, for Jewish people, because you will never be able to rely on any other groups or any other people you have to just love yourself, protect yourself, take care of yourself, support yourself as a people, as a community. And you do a great job of that, you really do. Like I was talking to this person who his mom grew up in Iran. And when he was a little boy, he asked her, what are these candles in the windows of these people's homes? And she explained to him, well, those are Jewish people, and they put those candles so that other Jewish people know that if they're ever scared or hungry or anything, that this is a safe place. Nobody else does that, right? You guys are 0.02% of the population. Like, you're such a tiny minority, but the amount of light and strength and wisdom and intelligence that you bring to the world, like the way you've progressed our planet in so many ways, like with the Nobel Prizes, like obviously everybody knows at this point how Jewish people are so misrepresented there, like overrepresented there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so wrong word.
Right.
But like you're doing a good job of it. You just have to stay the course. This is just another blip. How many blips have you had in your history, right?
Right.
Much worse blips than this one, because you didn't have Israel and now you do.
Sure.
And so you will overcome this. You will. You'll
Yeah.
overcome this. And as much as it feels like you don't have the support of rational-minded people in the world because the extremists are so loud, so politically powerful, so violent, you do though. You do. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, most people are getting it. Maybe not those under 30, but thank goodness they don't really have the power to do anything right now other than post stupid things on TikTok.
Well,
But
and vote and
hopefully,
be the future of our nation. I mean, I think it's very easy to discount children as children, except for the fact that adults actually come from children. So these people are going to grow up, and they are our next leaders, particularly the ones that are in the Ivy League and in. So we can't just discount them
yeah.
as dumb kids. It's a real threat. It really is. On the other hand, to your point, I think that last week's election was a referendum. I mean, it was a clear rejection of like the direction that the left has taken us in. I mean, so many of us, like me, like you, like I am also a disaffected, I can't even use the word progressive anymore. I would never term myself progressive anymore, any more than Richie Torres was, because it's become a bad word. But I do believe in all those values. But at the same time, I did have to swallow the jagged Trump pill and say, you know what? Like the left is vowing to walk away from Israel. The left has allowed our campuses to be overrun by anti-Israel and in anti-Semitic mobs. The left is allowing New York City to be shut down every weekend by people literally calling for jihad, and something has to change. So on this note, I mean, what do you think? I mean, you had told our friend Sam a few years ago that you did not think that Canadians were generally racist people. And by the way, I've said over and over and over and over again through the years the same thing, that yes, there's anti-Semitism in America, just like there is anywhere, but we are not an anti-Semitic nation. But looking at what's happening, and I have to say, Yasmine, it's not just, it's even most of my closest friends, literally my closest friends who are not Jewish, almost all of them have abandoned me. They haven't in words, but they've stopped talking to me. They don't answer my texts. They like, I'm persona non grata ever since 10/7. And these are my best friends. I'm not talking about the tens of thousands of followers I lose every time I talk about Israel on social media. So what about Canada? I mean, Canada's further left than America. Again, like we saw the direction it took with your court case, which is sickening and tragic. But like Stephen Harper was one of the best friends Israel ever had, actually. But I see the backlash against him when I talk to Canadians. But again, I'm in the yoga world, but they are not fans of him. Like, so do you think that Canada will change course the way that America just like the House, probably the Senate, the judicial, the executive, all went Republican, unheard of. But I think it's not just the economy stupid. I think that people are sick of seeing our society be being burned down.
Absolutely. And we're not hearing the voices of all these people, but when it came to voting, now we hear their voices, right? Because these people are afraid to talk. They're going to be attacked in their workplaces or wherever it is where they're going to try and speak their mind because the extremists are so cultish and they just demand that you adhere to their mob narrative. Otherwise, you are a Nazi, you are a racist, you hate women, yada, 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 right? And so people would just stay silent and then speak their mind at the voting booths. And yes, absolutely, Canada will, you called
Really?
us your America's little cousin. We have a saying in Canada that says, when America sneezes, Canada catches a cold. There's we absolutely will go conservative in our next election. There's no doubt about that. Justin Trudeau has run our country into the ground. I am one of the very few people who could not stand his voice or his face. I thought he was just a psychopathic narcissist, the same way people have such strong feelings towards Trump. That's how I felt towards Justin Trudeau. But nobody could see it. And this is the thing about people who are trauma survivors, is we see the red flags before others do. And I knew that this man was nothing but bad news for our country. And it took so long for people to get it, because they're like, oh, but his hair, oh, but his yoga, oh, but his this, oh, but his that, oh, look at his tattoos, like just superficial
Exactly.
bullshit.
That's right.
Yeah. And he has done such a colossally horrible job of running the country that 24 liberal ministers, so from his cabinet, wrote a letter calling for his resignation.
When
Can
was
you
that?
imagine? Very recently. Yeah. And he hasn't even responded to the letter yet, as far as I know.
When are
But
your
that's, sorry?
When are your elections?
Well, Canada's complicated. It's not as clean as it is in America. So they can call elections when they feel that they are in a strong position. So that's what happened with Trudeau, is he called the election. He's been reelected 3 times at this point.
Yeah. There's no
But
term
his time, pardon me?
No term limits?
If he keeps on getting reelected, then he keeps on getting reelected. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. His father was in power for 10 years.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I have no doubt that we will be going conservative in the next election, and very much like America, insofar as Canadians are sick and tired of so many things that are beyond even what's happening in America, because in Canada, we don't have a right wing, really. We just have left, and more left. Like our Conservative Party is probably like on par with Bernie Sanders, to be honest. Like, not fiscally, but not economically, but it's pretty, it's very left. Yeah. And so, we will vote conservative, just because people are so sick and tired of the lies and the overreach of power from COVID, of what Justin Trudeau had done to us, and continuing after that, the control he has over the media. I'm writing articles, and I'm being on the news in different countries, and it can't even be shared on my social media. Canadians can't see what I'm doing. My Canadian followers can't get access to what I'm doing. Yeah, because
Is it censorship?
We've got censorship in the media.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding you. And then there's all of the issues that have to do with like the gender issues. So with him supporting the astronomical number of trans women in women's prisons, people that just like became trans when they got, prosecuted for sexual crimes against women, and then they get put into women's prisons, and he's supporting that. Women losing, like girls having, trans women in sports and losing their medals and all that kinds of stuff. These things make people angry. These things make people sad, right? We've had so many issues because sometimes trans people are legitimately good human beings, and sometimes trans people are predators. And we are not differentiating between the two. And so when you have some man with a full beard and full everything else going into a little girl's change room in a spa or in a public swimming pool and stuff like that, and when you try to speak up against that as a mother or as a father, as a concerned citizen, then you are the one that's demonized. People are gonna get upset about that. You know what I mean? Like we know, we understand danger, and we recognize that we're not being bigoted, we're not being transphobic, we're trying to protect ourselves and trying to protect our children. Sure. And there needs to be a clarification, there needs to be lines drawn. But he has like absolutely ridiculous laws around those kinds of things. I mean, I don't even want, you could just look into it.
Yeah.
Like it's absolutely absurd. And so for a million different reasons, I didn't even talk about the economy.
Yeah.
Um, for a million different reasons, he will definitely be gone. Yeah.
Okay, Yasmine, I actually do want to talk to you for the rest of my life. I'm not going to lie about that. But we're closing in 2 hours, and I got a stern warning from Sarah to respect your time. So I'm going to
Yeah.
ask one more question, even though I have 100 more. Just to, I've already disrespected your time, but just to pretend to respect your time. Thank you so much for being so generous with me. As we finish off, I do, first of all, I want to encourage everyone to tune into Yasmine's podcast, the Yasmine Mohammed podcast. Her guests are incredible and incredibly enlightening, particularly on the issues of Islam and their implications for the West. That being said, I know this is an unfair question because there's certainly way too many to name, but who are your heroes and heroines? I know it's a
Well,
long
you
list.
named one. You named one already, Sam Harris. He's always at the very top of the list. That TED Talk that he did in like 2010, where he talked about Afghan girls and it brought a tear to his eye. That was the first time that I had ever, as they say, felt seen and heard. I felt represented. I felt recognized as a fellow human being, and then when he was on the Bill Maher show with the infamous episode with Ben Affleck. And he continued to fight this fight where he was talking about how liberal people should be speaking up for free thinkers in the Muslim world, should be speaking up for, gay people in the Muslim world, but instead we are ignoring them or we are silencing them. And then, of course, Ben Affleck jumped in to play the part of the useful idiot. And so that was the day when I realized like I needed to write my book because as you said earlier, he was demonized simply for being an American straight white man, right? They didn't want to recognize that they didn't even want to engage with the argument that he was making. It was just his immutable characteristics were going to be the thing that they were going to just demonize him. And so I thought, well, as a brown Arab woman, I'll say the exact same thing. And then that will force people to engage with the argument because they can't stop at my immutable characteristics. So he's absolutely my hero. There's no doubt about that.
And it's because
Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
your book is out there in the first place.
He's
Not,
the reason my book is out there. Absolutely,
yeah,
no
not just
doubt.
why you wrote it, but also that he encouraged you, correct, to self-publish at first because people were scared. They loved it, but they're like, nobody wants to be the next Salman Rushdie publisher because now they're putting their lives on the line. And by the way, the fact that whether you see it this way or not, you really seem to like play down how I mean, you have risked your life to speak on the topics that you speak on, and you say stuff like, yeah, but if I were in this country, I literally would be killed for saying it, and I'm free, and I'm in Canada, and I'm like, well, I mean, I might say that Mustafa Hassan Yousaf or Salman Rushdie might say something otherwise. That being in the free world isn't enough. I mean, these guys have 24/7 guards for decades, and your willingness because you live in the free world like to put yourself on the line, this should not be mitigated, but these publishers were just, again, like, to me, I know I'm like in the vast minority of one, but I see this as, again, an extension of Islamophobia. These are the capos. They are afraid to speak up against Islam, and in so defending it, they actually are acting only out of fear. Sorry, I
Absolutely
interrupted you.
correct. No, you're absolutely correct. And in fact, that is the theme of my next book that I'm writing a book proposal with. And I actually do have a really great publishing house behind me this time. And that's what these were. In fact, I wrote about it in my updated edition of my book. I wrote about how Neil Blair, J.K. Rowling's agent, who was one of the people who passed on my book, wrote to me on October 8th and said,
I understand.
I really regret not picking up your book because now the world can see what you were saying. At the time, it felt like, because obviously he's not going to be my agent because he's Neil Blair, but it would have been one of his employees, and none of them were willing to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And so he felt, you know, sad about that.
Yeah.
He felt sad that the world was unwilling to hear what I had to say at that point in time, but now they see what I was saying. Now I don't look like an alarmist anymore because now they have the same vantage point that I do. Now we share the same perspective. And so my next book will focus on exactly what you were saying there. It's going to be like a step-by-step guide on how to encourage people to have these nuanced conversations, right? To not be afraid. Yeah, because that is what is, that cowardice will be our demise. You know, when this is what's going to save us, is speaking up. And we have amazing people like Douglas Murray, when he wrote The Strange Death of Europe. I mean, that book is like a book of prophecies at this point. You know, it's all come true. And all of the people like him that tried to speak too early were demonized, you know, but now more people can see, more people get it, more people are willing to understand, and hopefully more people are going to be willing to speak. And the more people that speak, the more we spread the risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then it's not just Ayaan Hirsi Ali, it's not just Sam Harris, it's not just Douglas Murray, but it's all of us in unison, speaking from our hearts, speaking the truth, instead of being afraid of this word Islamophobia, or being afraid of these mobs and how they're going to attack us. You were talking about my podcast. I'm just going to plug really quickly that my latest episode was with a Palestinian man who had a deli in Seattle. And on his menu, he would have different items. He'd have like Palestinian fattoush, Israeli hummus, because obviously he's a man who believes in peace. And these recipes are different. You know, like the hummus in Lebanon is a little bit different from the hummus in Egypt, is a little bit different from the hummus in Palestine. You know what I mean? They are slightly different. And so he was getting recipes from all over the Middle East. And because he dared to have on his menu Israeli items as well as items from other parts of the Middle East, he actually was so attacked that he had to shut his deli down and go bankrupt. And that's what they did to him. These are people who are pro-Palestine, pro-Palestinians. They left this man unable to feed his family. That's how much they care about Palestinians, because they were so angry that he dared to have Israeli items on his menu, that he dared to believe in peace and coexistence with his neighbors, right? So those are the kinds of people that I have on my podcast. And those are the kinds of people that speak the truth, even though it costs them so much. And so here in the West, what are we risking? There's no morality police that's going to come and imprison you or behead you and hang you from a crane. You know what I mean? Like, you are not under the same threat. There is no Hamas here that's going to torture you. All the videos of how Hamas has been torturing Palestinians is all over all over everyone's feed right now. We are not up against those kinds of things, right? And so when we choose to actively silence ourselves, I mean, we're talking today on Remembrance Day, where you talked about people that risked their lives, lost their lives for us to have these freedoms. And the fact that we are not only that we're not respecting these freedoms, that we're not using these freedoms to the fullest, but that we're spitting on these freedoms. We really are, is such an atrocity. It's such a, it's such a tragedy, especially when you think of all the people that risk their lives for us to have these freedoms,
And the people
And
who
so
still
it's
risk
really
their
important.
lives, and like people are still risking their lives just to try to get to America or to Canada to
Yeah.
be free. And yet these, smug, complacent brats, think that we live in this horrible country that everyone in the world wants to live in, by the way.
Yeah.
Irony
Yeah.
that.
Remember them in Afghanistan. Remember those planes in Afghanistan when they were leaving. How the Afghan people were hanging off of those planes trying to get out of that country. That's how horrible it is to live under an Islamic theocracy. That's how much they would rather be living under freedom. And then people over here spit on these freedoms and don't defend the freedoms. That's the most important thing here is we just allow people to step all over us. We roll out the red carpet. This is something we do in Canada to a devastatingly disgusting degree, is when Muslims try to infringe, when they try to spread their ideology in our schools. We have so many teachers from public schools right now that are being suspended and that are being, oh, I forgot what the word is, investigated for spreading Islam in public schools
Right.
of Canada, right? And this is the same country that, oh my God, if you tried to say the word God, right? If you tried
Right.
to evoke any kind of like Christian religious speech, you would be like absolutely attacked. But if you want to bring in the word Allah, and if you want to talk about Islamic things, and if you want to have an Islamic prayer room, and if you want to have your students take half of Friday off so that they could engage in prayer, and if you want to tell girls that they can't play soccer because it's sports are not for girls, and all of the things that are happening in our public schools, that's okay. Because if you speak out against that, then you're an Islamophobe,
Right.
right? So it's like people have just, as I said in my book, their minds are so open, their brains have fallen out.
100%.
And that's what I'd like to mitigate against that with my next book.
100%. Okay. Yasmine, all of your links are in the show notes, but I'm going to give you the opportunity. I'm so sorry. There's so much I also actually want to ask you about your organizations, and we didn't even get into that. But so for right now, and again, the links are in the show notes, but could you just tell people, where can they find you? Where can they follow you, and how can they support your work?
Thank you. Yeah, so you can go to yasminemohammed.com, and then you can find everything there about my book, about my organization, Free Hearts, Free Minds. So it's an organization that supports people that are leaving extremist Islam, whether they are questioning Muslims or whether they've renounced Islam like I have. It's a supportive community because, like I mentioned when I was talking about those two groups of people, if you're in this group, you are demonized, you are losing your friends, you are losing your family. It can be very dangerous. And so we have a community where it's a safe space. And so that is Free Hearts, Free Minds. And then there's my book, Unveiled. And there's my podcast, Yasmine Mohammed Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And my social media team have even started up a TikTok for me.
Oh no, no, not TikTok.
They're like, your voice is needed there, Yasmine. I'm like, well, you can put it there.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm now everywhere, and you can find me anywhere. And we have a podcast community. And so that's where people can have these conversations where they're in a safe space. They can ask the questions, they can share the resources where it's not public, so they don't have to be afraid of people losing their jobs or reputations being ruined because you dared to say that, Jewish people shouldn't be beaten up in the streets of Amsterdam or whatever other rational thinking that
Right.
you have. So yeah.
Wow. I always finish off the podcast asking the guest where the hope is. And I sort of want to complete the sentence because, like, you're it. You're it, Yasmin. I
Aw.
mean, you and the handful of people who, like you, have been just so vocal. And we have maybe you've heard the word Dayenu, but in Hebrew it means like it would have been enough. And it's like just even awakening the West to the threat of radical Islam, like Dayenu. But the fact that you have gone so far above and beyond to also really extend your allyship to the Jewish people, to Israel, knowing also how you were indoctrinated as a child and how because it is possible to see this part of an equation and not this part of an equation. But Dayenu, you are the hope. And ironically, the word for hope in Hebrew is Hatikva, right, which is the national anthem. Is there any other hope? Sorry, we've been going on forever. Is there any hope you want to add before I say thank you and goodbye?
I honestly do believe that despite all of the things that we talked about in this conversation today, I really do believe in the Jewish people. I feel that that's where the hope is for me, because I have been screaming about this for so long. The women of Iran, you saw them during the Women Life Freedom Movement, burning their hijabs in the streets, getting shot by the IRGC, getting beaten and raped to death. We have all been screaming about this across the globe for so long. But having the Jewish community so affected by these terrorists and having them join in our trying to awaken the West has really been, in so many ways, has made me feel so much relief. I feel safer now knowing that I have actual allies, people who actually get it. You know, when I went to Israel, I was saying to the people there, you know what it feels like. You know what the same, nobody else really in the world can know what it feels like to be actively hunted like this. And to know that there are so many people on the planet who would love to see you dead and who would do whatever they could, if they could, to make that come true. It's a very difficult thing to live with. And I envy those who don't know it, who don't understand it, and who have the privilege of just ignoring it and thinking that it doesn't, it's, you know, I'm not a Jew, so I don't need to speak up. I'm not an ex-Muslim, so I don't need to speak up, right? Have we learned nothing from history? You will be next. But they are not seeing that now. And in some ways, I really do envy them. But I think that the hope now is with the Jewish community because they are fierce. They are a fierce bunch and they've been through it all and they will overcome this as well. And I'm so grateful to have them as allies in this fight.
And we're grateful. I speak for all Jewish people when I say we are so grateful to have you. Thank you so much again, Yasmine. You've been so beyond generous with your time today and with your wisdom. And thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.